Chapter 2, War Drums. As the sun dropped lower, its warm rays pierced the jungle roof only occasionally. But when they did, the golden beams sliced through the forest to turn various ferns a bright green, or the trunk of a tree a rich brick red. Chuma no longer knew where they were. The country was turning hilly, and Chuma felt certain they were headed toward Mount Zomba, but he had never been this far west. Would they soon arrive at the Mangaja village? He had no way of knowing, but he almost wished that they would. He was so tired he thought he would drop, and he was hungry. Then suddenly, without any warning, they stepped out into a small clearing and the Redcaps stopped. It seemed to be their camp. There were two simple shelters made of palm branches under which the supplies were piled high. And there were two other Redcaps already there, sitting near a smoldering fire while they smoked rolled leaves of tobacco. The man carrying the sheep dropped it on the ground by the fire, and the leader gave more orders in a strange language. Soon the men by the fire butchered the sheep and put it on a spit over the fire to cook it. The man who had slapped Chuma herded the boys over to the edge of the clearing and tied a rope tightly to each boy's ankle. The rope was also tied securely to a tree. He cut the cords that bound their wrists together, then left to join the others near the fire. Chuma and Wekatani tried to make themselves comfortable on the ground between the great roots of the tree and waited to see what would happen. Nighttime in the jungle can be very dark. Very little starlight makes its way through the dense roof of leaves. Even at the edge of the clearing, it was dismally dark. Chuma and Wekatani sat dejectedly watching the 5 Redcaps around their small fire, feasting on the roasted sheep and passing a jug of some sort of liquor. "Those men have no right to be eating our sheep," Chuma thought angrily. Hunger kept him hoping that the Redcaps would bring them some of the mutton, but soon the men were so drunk they fell asleep. With the pain mounting in his stomach, Chuma finally dug into the folds of his loincloth and pulled out the cold yam. He took a bite. It was so good. Or maybe it was just that he was so hungry. He took another bite, then nudged Wekatani. "Want some yam?" "What? You want a bite of my yam?" whispered Chuma. "Where'd you get that?" said Wekatani, groping in the dark until he found the yam. "My mother. It was wrapped in my clothes." "Oh, I never knew a yam could be so good," Wekatani sighed, handing the remainder back to Chuma. "Do you think we can get these ropes off our ankles?" "I don't know," said Chuma, taking another bite and then putting the rest of the yam back into his clothes. He went to work trying to wiggle his foot out of the loop that held it firmly, but the harder he pulled, the tighter the rope seemed to hold him. "I can't get it off." There was a quiet moan from Wekatani. "I made it." "Then help me." Wekatani pulled and tugged. He used his teeth to try and tease the knot loose, but it was of no use. The rope held Chuma fast to the tree. "See if you can find something sharp to cut the rope," said Chuma. Wekatani slipped off into the dark, and suddenly Chuma felt terribly alone. He waited a long time. Wekatani ought to be back by now, the boy thought, his heart beating fast. Maybe he got lost. What if he never comes back? And then, as if he'd never been away, Wekatani was at his side. "I can't find anything sharp. Only a few stones around here, and they're all smooth. I can't see a thing in this darkness." "What about a knife from the Redcaps?" asked Chuma. "Are you crazy? What if they woke up?" They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Chuma said, "Maybe you should go for help." "In the dark? I'd get lost for sure, and the hyenas would find me." It had been a bold suggestion, and Chuma shivered. The short time that Wekatani had been away had been enough to let him know how much worse it was to be a captive alone. But it seemed the only way. "How about just before it gets light? You could hide in the jungle until you can see and then find your way home." "I guess so," admitted Wekatani, "but for now, let's get some sleep." The constant chatter of jungle birds and monkeys woke Chuma. He'd been dreaming about his 3 sisters playing at the edge of the lake. Home. Home is so good, he thought, and a heavy sadness spread through his heart when he remembered where he was. A faint light tinged the sky above the clearing. They'd slept longer than they should have. He shook Wekatani and they both sat up. But in addition to the jungle noises, they could hear something else. The thump, thump, thumpity-thump of distant drums. "Chuma, listen! Ajawa drums!" "You're right." Chuma imagined some of the head men of his village beating the hollow logs that sent their message for miles through the jungle. Their rhythms could announce many things, but this beat meant War. It's war against the Manganja, concluded Chuma in a hoarse whisper. Because we're missing? His friend asked. Maybe. Chuma thought for a moment. That broken Manganja spear in the sheep's blood did make it look like the Manganja had captured us. And now Ajawa warriors will attack them. Yes, I think the Red Caps set it up that way. But why? Wondered Chuma out loud. Right now, who cares? I've got to get out of here. Take care, said Chuma, putting his hand on his friend's shoulder, and come back soon. I don't like being a prisoner. As Weketani slipped away, Chuma could barely see him, moving through the dense jungle as he tried to get around the campsite and find the trail by which they had entered the small clearing. Then suddenly, a terrible howling erupted. Weketani must have come upon some baboons that were trying to raid the Red Caps' camp. The baboons screeched and yelled as they scampered up the vines to reach the safety of the trees. Chuma held his breath and wished he could silence the baboons, but it was no use. Two of the Red Caps sat up and spotted Weketani running down the trail. They grabbed their guns and tore down the trail after him. Run, Weketani, run! Urged Chuma under his breath, his fists clenched in fear. If Weketani did not escape, they might not be rescued. And if they were not rescued, there might be a war and many Ajawa would die. Chuma wanted to pray to the spirits, but he knew the spirits didn't care. Their help could only be obtained by a sacrifice, and he had nothing to give. Then he remembered the small scrap of yam left from the night before. He dug it out. It's my only food, he thought. If I throw it to the spirits, I might die, but if I don't, Weketani might not escape. Before he could decide, a gun boomed in the distance. Chuma's heart sank. Had the Red Caps killed Weketani? He waited, but heard no more booms, just the sound of the jungle coming alive in the morning, birds singing, insects buzzing, and still in the distance the talking drums. When he felt he could wait no longer, he heard footsteps coming up the trail. The sight of Weketani staggering back into camp was a tremendous relief. At least he was alive. One of the two Red Caps who followed him had cut a stiff vine and was using it to whip Weketani every few steps if the boy did not move fast enough. The boy's arms were tied behind him. When they arrived at the tree where Chuma was tied up, the Red Caps gave Weketani a shove that knocked him to the ground. The man was yelling at the boys in his strange language as he retied the rope around Weketani's ankle, leaving some extra rope to tie around his other ankle, too. Then he gave Chuma's rope a big yank to see that it remained tight. Chuma's ankle throbbed with pain. The rope was so tight. What happened? Chuma asked as the Red Cap went back to his camp. Then he realized what a bad shape his friend was in. He was smeared with mud, and he had scratches and scrapes up and down both legs. There was a cut across his forehead that was oozing blood and beginning to swell. What happened to you? Chuma asked anxiously. Again. They caught me, pouted Weketani, tears welling up in the corners of his eyes. I can see that, said Chuma, but how? I don't know, Weketani said, looking away into the jungle. I ran and ran. I knew they were behind me. I ran down a little hill and crossed a stream. I was climbing the other side when they shot at me with a gun. I did not want to die, so I stopped. When they caught me, they beat me. Chuma asked no more questions. By noon, the Red Caps still hadn't given the boys anything to eat or drink. Chuma began to worry. He'd been thirsty before, but this was serious. His mouth was completely dry and his tongue had swelled up so that he talked funny. His head felt light, as if he might fall over if he stood up. Weketani looked worse as the hours passed. Finally, he decided they must do something, even if the Red Caps got angry. So he began to yell, "Give us food! We need water!" He knew that at least one of the men understood the Ajawa language. But when the Red Caps looked over at him, they just pointed and laughed. Still, Chuma kept yelling. Maybe their captors would get tired of the noise and give them what they needed. One Red Cap grabbed a leg bone from the sheep they had feasted on the night before. Chuma eagerly saw that there were still some shreds of meat on it. The Red Cap walked toward the boys, and Chuma sat quietly in expectation. The Red Cap stopped a short distance away and gave Chuma a wicked grin. Then he dropped the bone to the ground, kicked dirt on it, and said, "Hungry?" When he made a gesture for Chuma to come and get it, Chuma lunged, but the bone was out of reach. He pulled hard on the rope that bound him to the tree, got down on the ground, and stretched out on his belly, reaching as far as he could. but the bone was still beyond his reach. The redcap broke into a great laugh, and the others joined in. The more Chuma stretched and groaned, the more the redcaps roared until they were bored with their game. But Chuma refused to give up in defeat. He crawled back to the tree and began looking around until he found a small stick. Then, attracting as little attention as possible, he scooted back toward the bone and reached out with the stick. It just reached, and he began to roll the bone toward him. He got it rolled halfway over, then it rolled back. He tried again, but just when it was about to come a full turn, he slipped and bumped it back even farther away. After that, he could not reach it at all. "Chuma, Chuma," Wekatani whispered. "Try this." It was a longer stick with a little branch on the end. Using it like a hook, Chuma was able to roll the bone back and finally retrieve it. Back at the tree, the boys eagerly pulled remaining meat from the bone. It may have been too dirty even for dogs back in the village, but they were so weak from hunger, they didn't even care. They ate it anyway. It tasted good. As Chuma was gnawing the last bit of gristle from the bone, Wekatani said, "Where'd they go?" In their excitement over having something to eat, the boys had not noticed that the redcaps had left camp. "They're around here somewhere," Chuma said. "I don't think so," said Wekatani. "I think they've left. Look, the supplies under that far shelter are missing. They've gone somewhere. Now's our chance," said Chuma. "We've got to get free and get out of here." What do you think? Are they going to make it?